Hi everybody, my name's Ron Carpenter and I'm sitting here in the kitchen, which is where I work on my guns in the wintertime because my shop is just too cold. A few weeks ago a friend of mine tried out one of my Ruger guns, an SR9C, and he said, "What have you done to the trigger?" And I said, "I just polished it up and lubricated it well." He said, "Whatever it was, you need to make a video of it." And so that's our purpose for it today. You don't need very many or very expensive tools. I got a pin punch set on eBay. I got an Arkansas stone on eBay. And I got a tube of graphite lock lubricant at the Home Depot. And I have a garden variety Sears Craftsman rotary tool, otherwise known as a Dremel tool. And on it I have an emery impregnated rubber wheel. It is not a cut-off wheel. It's the kind of thing jewelers use to polish up sets, custom-made sets and rings, and polish up gold and other objects like that. And, of course, I have the Ruger SR9C. First thing we're going to do, make sure the gun's clear. And then we'll move the camera, disassemble it, show you what I do, and if you like it, maybe you can try it on your Ruger. Well, we have all of the associated parts of the firearm here on the mat. We're not going to be dealing with the recoil spring or the barrel or the takedown pin. We're going to be dealing with the frame and the slide, and specifically the striker. If you examine how the action on this works, when the gun is cocked, this little tab right here sticks up about 1/8 of an inch, and it engages this little finger right here on the striker. Now this gun doesn't have a mainspring in the handle like a hammer gun does. It doesn't have a sear. And since it doesn't have a hammer, it doesn't have that little edge that the sear catches in. So this part here, this finger that sticks up, or trigger tab that sticks up from the trigger bar, is the nearest thing that this gun has to a sear. And this finger here on the striker is the nearest thing it has to that little ledge on the inside of the hammer that catches the sear. So here's what I've come up with for an improvement. The first thing I want to do is protect other parts of the gun. And so I slide a little piece of blue tape. You can use blue tape, electrical tape, anything to give you a little layer of protection. Then I take my Sharpie marker and right on the leading edge of that little tab that sticks up, I blacken it with the Sharpie marker. And then I take my Arkansas stone and holding it squarely and also parallel to the bend on that tab. In other words, what I'm saying to you is that that tab does not lay flat like this. Rather, it lays up on an angle. You want to try to maintain that angle. And as you're rubbing, you don't want to fiddle bow or rock this stone, because if you do, you round the corners off of the tab and push it out of dimension. Target triggers, they have a jig for a 1911 that puts this stone in the exact position for the sear face so that you can get the exact angle that John Browning designed in it. For this, all we really want to do is remove the tool marks that were made when it was die stamped, and on a new gun you can use a magnifying glass and you can see all kind of ridges and lines and torn metal where it was stamped. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hold it off at that little degree, and I can feel the bumps on that, and we're going to take very short, very straight strokes, no fiddle bow. And after about 10 strokes, we take a look at where our Sharpie mark is, and you'll see the high and low spots on the face of that tab. And essentially you just remove enough material so that the Sharpie marks are gone. Maintaining that angle, don't be going like this, and keeping straight strokes, don't be going like this, until when you look at that tab, all you see is shine. If you look at this gun frame, you will see that there are a lot of moving parts. And when you pull the trigger, this piece of linkage moves and it's against the frame rubbing. There are pivot points where the trigger rotates. There are pivot points around the safeties where the fire control mechanism slides. And all of this sliding and rubbing picks up grittiness in a new trigger. And so what I decided to do, rather than tear it down and try to be a gunsmith, which I'm not, is to lubricate it with lock lubricant. When you look at the trigger, you can imagine that there are pivots, one of them's right here, where the trigger has to move in a rearward direction in order to function. And what I did was go down in here and just give it a puff of graphite on the top, and then turn it upside down and put the tip of the graphite below the trigger and give it a puff. And then let's pull the trigger, because that lowers this linkage and makes it easier. I just ran right across the top of this linkage, laying some graphite down. Give it a puff here at the safeties, and any place else I can get graphite in there where I know there's sliding motion going on. After I've done that, I want to shake the gun a little bit, turn it upside down and shake it, and then cycle the trigger mechanism. You can recock it by just pushing on that little lever right there. Graphite does an amazing thing. It fills the pores of the metal. It fills the pores of the frame, if it's plastic or metal, and it makes a smooth sliding, naturally lubricated, not affected by temperature lubrication. And that grittiness that's in your trigger goes away when you rub this graphite in. Shake it a little more, cock it. Now at this point we've got the trigger tab polished and the frame lubricated. We're going to set that aside and look at the slide. First thing we need to do is take the slide apart. I'm just going to go through it briefly, but if you need more detail on disassembly, the Ruger website has cleaning and disassembly instructions, including removal of the striker should it need to be cleaned. But you take the captured recoil spring out, take the barrel out, set them aside. We're not going to be dealing with those. What we are going to be looking at is this little finger that's on the side of the striker. It appears to be a precision cast piece of equipment, and it's good enough to put in a gun right out of the casting. because it is an investment casting. That's Ruger's other business. But there is still a roughness on that finger, and that engages with your trigger. That finger is like the little notch that's on a hammer gun that engages the sear. And so what we're going to do is remove this and polish it with the jeweler's tool. You will notice that there are also two buttons on your slide. This one here is the magazine drop safety. This one here is the firing pin block safety. If you've ever taken other striker guns apart, you say, well, how can that be? Because the firing pin is just a straight rod that goes in there and slides back and forth. That's true, except the engineers at Ruger put shoulders on this striker, and there's a massive block of material back here to give it more momentum. That means it needs less spring and less travel to do what it does, because the momentum will drive the firing pin to the primer and make it work. So the way you go about getting this apart is you press down on this button first. Press down on this button first, and then press down on that button, and it allows the mainspring or the striker spring to push the striker all the way to the front. Ruger says in their video you can use a heavy paper clip or a straight piece of wire. I don't find that I can get a good enough grip on that, so I've got a small pin punch. I believe the pin punch set was about $6 on eBay. And there's a small hole right there to the side of the cocked indicator on the striker door, and there's a spring-loaded detent inside. And basically what you want to do is push that detent down, and then, whoops, I had it upside down. Push that detent down and then move the striker door to the downward position. That comes off one piece, and at that point your striker will slide right out, and in my case it pushed out the magazine drop safety. No biggie, just drop it back down. It's U-shaped. If that happens to you, it's U-shaped, and you put it in with the U facing you when the slide is upside down. You don't have to worry about the detent coming out because it's captured back in there. It's not going to fly across the room. And this gives us our striker to look at, and as I said, there is a very large amount of material back here compared to normal strikers. Normally they are like this all the way back. And there's a shoulder, and there's a shoulder. And this one is the firing pin block safety, and this one is the magazine drop safety. What we're concerned with in this trigger job is to polish this little surface just on the part that mates up with the trigger tab that's on the trigger bar. And to do that, I have a Dremel tool. It's very noisy, and I will tell you that you don't use any pressure on it, just touch, and you only need about 10 seconds of that. And I don't know if you can see it in these lights. I'll move it around, but it makes a mirror finish on that. And that mirror finish, along with the polished finish that's on the trigger tab, makes a situation where you cannot have a precognition of when the shot's going to break. People that teach shooting will tell you the shot that surprises you is the one that hits exactly where you were aiming the gun. Now, all we have to do is put the striker back in the gun, press down on that safety, press down on the other safety, turn it so the finger is exactly where you want it, push it all the way in. When it's in the ready position, it's usually back about here. But when it's all the way in, you should be able to see the tip of the firing pin from the breech face. Then from the bottom of the slide, you start your striker door. Like all precision things, it only fits one way, so if it's not going, there's something wrong. So you line it up with the slots in the striker, and the first thing it comes in contact with is the spring housing facing, and then you push down on the detent spring, and when you go past that, when it's all the way in, it'll snap. And then you can catch that with your thumb and pull it back to the ready position. Man, does that shine. At this point, all we have to do is reassemble the slide by putting the barrel back in, putting the big end of the spring up to the front of the gun. I kind of rotate it a little bit in case it needs to be seated, and then push it in like that. There is a little semicircular recess for this flat round piece on the capture spring, and it has to be all the way into that in order for the gun to function properly. Now we're going to put it together and do a function test. When we took it apart, we had to push the extractor down in order to get the gun to come apart without pulling the trigger. We've been playing around with it, putting it up in the fire position and working on it. I want to make sure that that extractor is back down because it cams the fire control system out of the way. At that point, all we have to do is slide the gun back together, push it all the way back, set the slide release, put the takedown pin back in. Now, before the gun will function, you have to move that ejector back up where it belongs. The book says to slide an empty magazine up in there to do that. On the SR9, you probably need to do that. On this, my finger's long enough to reach up in there and snap it back up, and that makes it so when you do that, the gun cocks. And now I'm going to pull the trigger. Pretty smooth. Does the safety work? It does. How about the trigger safety? Trigger won't pull unless that little leaf is pushed down too. And once again, very smooth and no precognition of when the shot's going to break. Well, that's about all I have on my little trigger job. There's a couple of things about it. Number one thing is it doesn't modify any of the parts that were developed and engineered for this gun. If you're a target shooter, it doesn't really matter what you do to your gun to make it run fast. If you're going to make a race gun out of a gun, you can lighten the hammer spring, you can lighten the trigger springs, you can shorten, in this case, the striker spring, and do a lot of other modifications. You might take the magazine drop safety mechanism out of it so that when you're changing magazines, they just fall freely, and the gun, it's a race gun. This is my carry gun. I've never had to pull this gun on somebody, but should I have to, and should I actually have to use it to defend myself, I don't want a lawyer asking me why I modified this safety or shortened the striker spring to make the trigger pull easier, or put non-standard parts in the gun to make it do this or that. And if you ever have to shoot somebody, a lawyer will be asking those questions and trying to say that you did that because you intended to shoot somebody. And that's just a legal hassle that I don't want to face. But what I have done is what hot rod car builders have done for years, is take what's there and make it the best it can be. And by polishing the trigger faces and the striker face, by lubricating the mechanism so that it glides freely, you wind up with a trigger that is just as smooth as glass, with no precognition of when the shot breaks. I'm not a gunsmith. I don't have a trigger scale. But I can tell you that every time I shoot this gun, it surprises me. And once again, the people that teach shooting will tell you the shot that surprises you is the one that's right where you aimed it. So, that concludes the video. If you guys have SR9s, 40s, or the new SR45, open it up, look it over, see if there are machine and tool markings on your mechanism, and give it a try. It's non-invasive. If it works for you like it's worked for me, I know you'll be happy. Good shooting.